Hello and welcome to the Womb Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have DaniElle with me here today. Thank you so much for joining me, DaniElle. I invited DaniElle onto the podcast because I've been following her writings. I've been following your writings, and you started to write about the Holy Yes program and about saying yes to the sacred calling that is our life. At least this is what I was reading in what you were writing. And it felt so exactly at the core of some of my work with womb wisdom, with with connecting to our divine guidance and our individuated divine self. When we look at how we conceive of the divine, how we understand the divine, there's this understanding that the divine is all one, everything, right? And then there's this, but we are individual beings, right? And so there's this sense that there's an individuated divine self that can connect and be one with all things, and at the same time have an individual flavor that is being expressed in our life. And saying a full, wholehearted, whole being, whole-bodied yes to fully living and expressing that divine, I call it medicine sometimes, because so many of us feel this calling to be the medicine for that this ailing world seems to need. But it's also, that's just so intrinsic to it's food, it's nourishment. We are this divine nourishment for the world. That's this individual flavor, aroma. And so that holy yes feels to me like, oh, I'm going to be in complete alignment with that. I'm going to really connect with that essence that I am, that divine wisdom that's coming through me. And I'm going to fully align myself, fully devote myself to that. And that's at the core of my work, particularly my upcoming work with the Enchantress archetype. I'm going to be offering a course that working with the Enchantress archetype that specifically works with the menstrual cycle, and particularly the premenstrual phase and the perimenopausal phases of our cycles in our life. And that these also pre-menarche, before we start bleeding as young girls, that is a time when we have access, when our sensitivity and awareness to that divine essence that we are is magnified. And these are all times, every month, premenstrually, before we bleed, and while we're bleeding, before we start bleeding as young girls, and as we're approaching menopause, and then during menopause itself, we have these veils are lifted, and the mystery of who we are at our core, at our essence, our divine individuated self, and how we're being called to express that in the world, all becomes revealed in certain ways, or we get drawn to it, we get enchanted into that. And so I reached out to DaniElle. I reached out to you and said, hey, we got to collaborate. You're talking about this holy yes. I'm talking about the Enchantress. Let's get together and create something together. And so I would love for you, DaniElle, to introduce yourself a little bit more to the listeners and share a little bit more about what was coming through for you when you were talking about the Holy Yes, how it's evolving, and how you're feeling this connection with the Enchantress and our collaboration.
Wow, thank you. Yes. I just love feeling the bigness of this, feeling the connections between our work. And the way you put things into words is just so powerful. So thank you. I'm so grateful to be here, and that we yeah, we talked about this, how collaboration and co-creation is just like so much the way of the future. And I feel so much value from the wisdom that you bring and how you're able to make these connections, um, and especially connecting the work that I'm doing with womb wisdom, even though the work that I'm doing is for people that don't have wombs as well. But like, it's almost like the cosmic womb, like the collective womb, that we're also all able to work with and tune into and connect to. The cycle within us, within our bodies, is also the cycle that is of the cycle of life itself. And so it's just so profound for all of us, even those of us without wombs, to be able to tune into this, but then especially those of us that do have wombs, because we also have information and access to it on an embodied level that is natural, that's just hormonal and part of our life cycle, part of our monthly cycle. So yeah, those were a lot of questions that, open questions, at the end of your beautiful introduction. So perhaps we can just take them like one at a time, because I could just talk for hours, just answering the questions that you shared. But yes, I am an initiated priestess, and my life is devoted in service to life itself, to unconditional love, to universal love, to, as you spoke to, the oneness, the biggest and deepest frequency of life itself is this, for me, this universal, unconditional love, like the force that is moving the cycles that we all experience, the challenging ones, the beautiful ones, the conscious, the unconscious, the forgetting, the remembering, the light, the dark, the in, the out. All of that for me is fueled by this force of love, and that's what I'm here in service to. That is my work. And I feel like everything that you said about the Enchantress, like, and Holy Yes, Holy Yes is, we're speaking about Holy Yes as this is a offering that's coming, and that speaks to all of what we just shared, and what Sama shared, and what I shared, even about my service. And I love how, and I think specifically as it relates to the Enchantress, I'll say is that there's a yes to even the like discomfort and the challenge and the mystery and the unknown and the darkness. And that when we can say yes to that, it can enchant us, it can guide us, it can lead us. Like, that's the essence that I'm feeling with enchanting, is like being led, being guided by a force. And oftentimes we say no, and we avoid these experiences that are uncomfortable or challenging or are unknown, in our culture. And when we can open to them and we can embrace them, that's the holy yes. That's the like, okay, instead of contracting, instead of avoiding, instead of resisting, opening. And this is also what we encounter with the Enchantress. As we all know, the premenstrual phase of the cycle has a reputation for being the most challenging. Obviously not for everyone, but for many. I know for me it is. Not every single month, but like it's always like a big time, or it's often a big time of revelations, but before the revelations comes the confusion or the dis-ease or the frustration, or the longing, or there's always a strong sensation, often, sorry, not always, some, it used to be always, but now it's more on occasion it's like really intense. But so leaning into this, going into this feeling, surrendering to the feeling rather than judging the feeling, because I find that it makes it worse when, these menstrual emotions, moods, and things arise, and then I've often judged those moods and emotions and tried to change them rather than letting them happen, letting them run their course, to then know that on the other end is a revelation, is a miracle, even, I would say. When I say miracle, I mean like a complete shift in consciousness, like a miraculous moment of change, transformation, alchemy. All of these words can describe the phenomenon. And perhaps the helpful thing to do in these situations is to become enchanted by and fascinated by our emotions, and like, whoa, like I said, like lean in, open to them, to like really witness them, and to, instead of being disenchanted, instead of being disillusioned, maybe disillusionment is one of the emotions that comes up, or disenchantment is one of the emotions that comes up, but even in that, to be enchanted by it, to be open to it, to be curious about it, to be welcoming of it, to then allow the transformation to happen, because that's how evolution happens. This is life itself. This is the force. So when we can love it unconditionally, when we can love it universally, we can let it in and let it transform us. And for me, that's been a huge life-changing thing to be able to do, because when there's more resistance, it's just more stuckness, meaning like I feel like there's often this feeling of stuckness, like somehow something is unfulfilling, but there's fear of moving into the unknown, so that's where we stay stuck. And I lost the exact point, but and then moving into the fear is how we keep evolving, and we let life, even if it's challenging, even if it is uncomfortable, we are growing. Whereas I think oftentimes the fear of the unknown keeps people stuck, and that's also uncomfortable, but that's more uncomfortable, or more, I would almost even say, it sounds dramatic, but anti-life, to just resist the unknown than to go into the unknown and feel the discomfort of the unknown, because that's inevitably going to change. Whereas the just staying stuck in resistance to the unknown is not inevitably going to change. So I know this is all very conceptual, but we can talk more about this to make it more concrete, I guess, in some way, as it relates to our menstrual cycle, as it relates to the Enchantress. But I hope that that's clear, just generally speaking, about the process that we go through with saying holy yes to life itself, holy yes to being transformed, holy yes to the unknown, holy yes to all of the feelings that we're feeling, rather than resisting them and remaining stuck. To keep moving, to keep saying yes. And all of this is what I am in service to, as in the frequency of evolution, the frequency of expansion, the frequency of yes, which is unconditional, and it's trusting life itself and all that it brings. Whereas the resistance and remaining stuck is actually not trusting in life itself and allowing life to I like to say, have its way with you. Like, let life have its way with you. Like, let go, let God, or let go, let Goddess, is another like catchphrase that I like to use to bring some, bring some attention to this phenomenon. Because yeah, our resistance is actually causing more suffering than anything. And I feel like that's where the premenstrual cycle gets even more intense and even more challenging, is when there's the resistance. And so how can we find enchantment to let the flow continue with ease? When I say the flow cycles, but the flow meaning like the premenstruals before you will release and bleed. So, what energies, what emotions, what beliefs, what narratives are no longer serving, needing to be transformed and needing to be released. What is not holding on to grow into, when we think about it, to grow into like a child, to grow into, an entity. What is not going to be continued? What is not going to be carried on? So that's a lot. But that's where I'm seeing these, these energies weaving together, of your work, of my work, of Enchantress, of Holy Yes, of just our process, our collective process, our individual process.
Beautiful. So some questions came up for me to ask you about what you shared. One is, I'm curious if you can tell a story about a time when you felt resistance in your process that was keeping you from the flow, and give us like a more concrete example of then how you were able to return to that holy yes, and what the gifts might have been for the slowdown that the resistance provided you.
The last thing you said, the slowdown?
Yeah.
Can you say the whole sentence or the whole question once again? Like of the slowdown?
I'm curious what gifts you might have discovered in the slowdown that the resistance provided for you.
Okay. This is a good question. I'm thinking of an example. I don't know. I'm trying to think because I don't want to get too detailed with this one, but I don't know how directly this correlates with my monthly cycle, but I think the Enchantress archetype is can happen at any time. I think that the energy is most present during, the certain phase in the moon cycle, or during our own intermenstrual cycle. But so I have always been I'm a recovering people pleaser. I cared a lot about what people think, which held me back from speaking my truth fully, openly, authentically. And that isn't healthy. It's not healthy to kind of contort and compromise who you are, your boundaries, your truth, because of what other people think. So it's interesting how fear can create this very circumstance and situations that we most fear. It can actually create them so that we face them and we then overcome them. And so something happened where someone interpreted something that I did or said, I finally had the courage to speak something, and then someone interpreted something I did or said in the wrong way or in their own way. Maybe it's not even a wrong way, but it's something that I've learned that people are always going to have an opinion, so it's better to be who you are and share your truth rather than compromising yourself and just being compromised, and trying to please everybody, because nobody's going to be anyway, even if you are compromising yourself, or not nobody, but not everybody. People will always have something. So anyhow, so this then expressed something to me, perception, their judgment, and it was initially very triggering, as it had been something that I had been trying to avoid, meaning not really, holding back in certain ways. And so I was very triggered by that. And as I sat with the trigger and felt into why it was triggering and if what was being said was true, because I oftentimes will assume that because someone feels something that it must be true, and that I must have done something incorrectly because everyone should agree, or everyone should feel good about it if I did my job correctly, which that's not true. That's just not true. And this is something that I had to learn through this experience, and just in general, that we're never gonna do things that are completely celebrated by everybody, because everybody has their own individual perceptions of things that often have nothing to do with you. So I sat with that feeling, and then it quickly shifted, and it actually brought me even deeper into my personal power, into my creative power, into my knowingness of my own truth. And so I'm grateful that that experience happened, actually. And it actually made me have that much more value and worthiness of myself, and have that much more clear boundaries, and understanding of, who to surround myself with, or who to engage with, or who to just who to be associated with, we'll say. And yeah, I mean, it ended up bringing me even deeper into service and deeper into truth, and feeling that even more gratitude, even more certainty, even more confirmation, I suppose. And I'm not sure actually how this directly relates to everything that we're saying, if it's the best story to tell, but it's the story that came through, so I went with it. It's kind of it really, I released certain beliefs, released certain limitations, transformed spheres. It's all thing that I would absolutely not want to ever happen or want anybody to ever think or feel happened. And it actually was really beautiful because it was in service to everyone and everything and growth and yeah. So what do you, maybe you can help me to
Yeah.
weave that with the connections. Maybe you're picking up on something specific, but that's the story that came. It was a big turning point for me. It sounds, it sounds like a small story, but it actually was something that really was like an initiation in a sense. So,
Well, I feel like the way that you shared the story makes it very universal, because I think everyone can relate to that moment when the thing that they would least want to happen is happening, whether it's in relation to someone else or some circumstance or some event. And then that the initial resistance to it of saying, no, this can't be happening, that, can sort of be a painful moment in that. And the whole thing can be painful. And then that's an added painfulness on top of it. And that gives us that, so oftentimes that enough of a slowdown and a deepening into the discomfort of the moment, that I feel even that no at first, that initial resistance, can often be an important ingredient in the situation, because it slows us down enough. And then if we can realize that, oh my goodness, I've been saying no to this, usually takes a moment to realize I've been saying no to this. And what if I relaxed that resistance, or can I relax that resistance and come back into, because there's a discomfort in that no as well that's added to the situation. And then as we relax into it and come back into that inner, okay, what's here for me? What can I say yes to? And we find there's a wisdom, there's a growth possibility, there's an awareness, a new development of, gosh, this tells me I need to have different kind of boundaries. This tells me that I don't need to do the people pleasing anymore. This tells me this wisdom or that wisdom. And as we open into that, yes, we get flooded with all of this nourishment and wisdom that comes through. And this is exactly how the Enchantress works. And I was saying before we got on the recording that the Enchantress often has these two shakers with sprinkles in them to sprinkle onto our lives, right? And one of them is the sprinkling of wisdom and beauty and joy and all the things that we desire, and the other one is the sprinkling of pain and discomfort and friction and disharmony, and things we don't like. And she's seasoning things with both of those in a good mixture, and that both brings flavor and spice to our experience. And so that finding that yes to all of that, and I would venture to say that even saying yes to the resistance that might come up, and that's why I asked my question the way that I did, is that the resistance can often be an important slow down moment that allows us to feel more eventually, if we can. And oftentimes I find that my own resistance allows time for something to develop and grow in the unknown, in the invisible realms, that then is ready and prepared when and comes up from underneath and makes it easy to let go of that resistance. Whereas if I'm trying to push myself to release my resistance before that development has happened, then it kind of can become more friction and more dissonance in that process. saying yes sometimes to the resistance as a welcome slowing down of everything can be another aspect of the holy yes. And it's both and of like recognizing the resistance and saying, okay, how can I get back into saying yes instead of no? And then also, how can I appreciate that slowdown that no was giving me or is still giving me until I'm ready to say yes again. So those are the reflections that came up. And I'm noticing that our time has flown by, and I could sit here and talk to you about Holy Yes and Enchantress all afternoon, but I have another appointment now. So I just wanted to give us a moment to mention that you're working on this Holy Yes program as yet to be announced. What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you to find out more about that?
You can follow me on Facebook or Instagram. Mm-hmm. Is it possible to just put the information in the comments?
Yes,
or
we can.
It's kind of long to type, but yes. Oh my gosh, we've got to unpack that a little bit more when we have more time, because that was actually profound. The resistance and like the dance, there's a dance. And yes. I think, as long as we don't clench the resistance for dear life and never budge, then that's where it gets to be stuck. But when we feel the resistance, then lean into the resistance, get curious about the resistance. That's that beautiful enchanting kind of dance. Mm-hmm. Wow. But then there's the initial resistance that it's a lot. And my head is actually like, whoa. Whoa.
Well,
I need to that more, but
I feel like it's an invitation for a part two, because a part two of our podcast. So let's keep an eye out for that, listeners. And I also want to announce that we have an upcoming Enchantress experience that we are co-creating together. And I didn't pull up the dates. I think it's going to be on the next full moon. Is that right?
We decided 2 weeks from now, about 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
I think it's the 25th, if I'm correct. But we'll put the information, right?
Yeah. We'll put the information in the below. And so in the description of this call. So look for that and join us. That'll be an experiential meeting where we will guide everyone into an experience of their inner enchantress and their holy yes, as an sort of an introduction to some of these in an experiential way. So look for that, and listeners know that if you are curious about other things about this, what we're talking about, and anything else going on in the Womb-Centered Healing Temple, visit us at wombcenteredhealing.com. You can sign up for the newsletter there, and you will definitely receive up-to-date announcements about these programs and events that we're talking about on the podcast. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, DaniElle and listeners. And that's all for now. Until next time.